Please welcome Gary McAdam to the stage. Give him a warm welcome. Give him some whoops.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gary McAdam. I'm an Agile coach and software engineer. Here's a scenario that you may or may not recognize. Hello, company. Your product would be great if it had some feature, although backlog doesn't look great, so maybe we'll just shove that in phase 3 or somewhere. I don't know. I've certainly experienced that in teams that I've worked in and as a customer as well, and it's not great. So I've worked as an engineer and coach for 8 years or so now in software, and I hear about this thing a lot, which is called minimum viable product. Hands up if you've heard of minimum viable product. Awesome. I'm going to bore you for 10 minutes. The first time I heard about it was probably like many others in a book called The Lean Startup by a guy called Eric Ries. And I think it builds on a lot of ideas that many people were probably already doing anyway in things like medicine and science, engineering, not just technology. But the good thing about the Lean Startup, I think, was that it, for the first time, kind of brought those ideas together in something that was really easily repeatable and easy to follow, and to start figuring out whether what we were doing really mattered. The idea is obviously simple if you've already heard of it. So start learning today and take the smallest amount of effort that you can and build something that's going to be sustainable. It's pretty easy. And we do this by take a hypothesis. So I don't know. I think moving our button up to the top of the page is going to lead to more engagement. Simple idea. And then we build it. And then we measure the outcome. Easy. And then we learn. So did what we think was going to happen? Awesome. Let's go to step 1 and let's go again. Did it not happen? Let's go to step 1 and let's do something else instead. And take those learnings with us. So we keep going around that loop. And if we think we're building the wrong thing, go to step 1 again. But this time do something bigger. So pivot into something else. But despite being quite a simple idea, I think there's some pretty crucial misunderstandings of MVP. Some people, I think, rightly so, think of it as a way to be truly iterative, to really be hypothesis-based, and to make sure that you're building the right thing. I think for others, they just kind of hear what they want to hear, and it just becomes a way to do what they wanted to do anyway. So it's not so much minimum viable product, it's just whatever I want to do. And in that sense, I think it's become a tool that's been turned into a weapon now. It's used against teams rather than being kind of a force for good, which I think it probably ought to have been. So here's some signs of maybe that you might be doing, or maybe your product owner, or probably your product owner, might be doing that they're abusing MVP. And here's some ways in which we can hopefully combat that. So the first one is scope negotiation. So rather than being about validating some hypothesis, it's now a case of, can we just squeeze this one more thing into MVP? Can we move that one into phase 2? This is the bad sign. You're not learning anymore. You're just kind of negotiating which order something's going to get done in. And similarly, another sign is just a single MVP. So really early on, I think a lot of projects suffer from this, which is you hear this phrase, the MVP, not the next MVP. And the downside to that is, it implies that there's like the MVP and then just the rest of the app, whatever that is. And it's wrong because you need to repeat, because if you just do this, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you're going to get left behind. Big red flag, phrases like beta and alpha, I don't think customers like to hear those. It implies something's not quite ready. Phase 1 and 2 and 3. Best case scenario there is that you've basically planned everything ahead of time, and it's just a case of what order you're going to do it in. Big red flag again, no validation or no data. You're probably just going to arrive at a conclusion that you've already decided on anyway. Not very scientific. A tip as well for this, if you find yourself in this scenario, write down your hypothesis beforehand. Sit with your team, write down a hypothesis on the board or in Slack or whatever, because otherwise you'll fall foul of this thing called post hoc theorizing, which is something we all do as humans, and it basically just means when something doesn't happen how you thought it would, you just change the thing that you thought was going to happen. And that's not very scientific. Very human, but not very scientific. So in summary, scope negotiation, single MVP, phrases like phase 1, 2, 3, whatever, and not having any data or a hypothesis, those are really bad signs. So what's good? If you're doing these, thumbs up. Having a continuous feedback loop, build, measure, learn, and closing that feedback loop as soon as you can. Because the quicker you close it, the quicker you can learn and the quicker you can iterate. You know, if you're not learning fast, you're not learning, basically. Being data-driven, really, really important. So start collecting high-quality metrics as soon as you can. And try and avoid vanity metrics, so things like hits. Not really a metric that tells you very much because it fluctuates all the time. You may find that hits are higher on a Saturday, so you start to optimize towards Saturdays when you release things, so it looks like you're doing very good things. Probably a whole talk about vanity metrics and what's called actionable metrics. Probably not enough time today, but if you're interested, check that out. There's a scenario of a plane that I wouldn't want to be on. Somebody who doesn't think they need data, but doesn't look like they're going in a very good direction. Have a core hypothesis and try and stick to one. If you do too much, you're probably not going to know what you've affected. It doesn't have to be functional either. It doesn't even have to be code. Dropbox is a great example of this. Dropbox, the very first sort of iteration of Dropbox was just a video online. They put it on Dig. They littered it with memes. People signed up. They got investment. Wasn't any code involved at all. And this is Drew Houston from Dropbox, who said, biggest risk is making something that no one wants. Not launching is painful, but not learning is fatal. So put something in users' hands. It doesn't even have to be code, and get real feedback as soon as you can. Learn fast. The only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else. Startup guru, Eric Ries. I don't know how much time we've got, but iPhone is a great example of this. So when the BlackBerry guys saw the iPhone launch, they assumed it was fake. They didn't even believe it. They saw it in the boardroom and they just didn't even believe that it was possible. And then 2 years later, they released a touchscreen phone. Probably a bit too late to the market. I don't even know when I last saw a BlackBerry. So I'd just like to talk very briefly. To summarize, sorry. Continuous feedback loops, build, measure, learn, be data-driven, have a core hypothesis. Don't even worry about being functional or being code, and just learn fast and start learning now. I just want to very briefly mention, if I've got time, long-term plans. So I think Agile, especially, and MVP to some degree, gets this question asked a lot, which is like, well, if you're looking at the short term so much, can you even plan for the future? And the answer is obviously yes. A good example of this is Spotify Rhythm. I definitely don't have enough time to go into Spotify Rhythm. You don't even need a big framework like this. This is just something that Spotify does if you want to learn more. Search it, it's really cool. Just think of your stuff as a homing missile. So set it off, start checking the conditions, and when the target moves, because it will move, you can respond to it, as opposed to some big bang cannonball, which you just put everything in and just send it off and hope it hits the target. And when it doesn't, all you can do is just watch from a distance. I'd just like to finish with a little quote. So this is from Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup. And he says the following about, to summarize the MVP. You think that the work you do today matters? Prove it. I'm sure that you're right, but let's double check. What's the evidence that the work you accomplished today actually even matters? Well, I pulled a story from a prioritized order and built it to the specifications of the product owner. Okay, well, how do we even know that the product owner knows what the customer wants? It seems like he does. It seems like a smart guy. Was he right the last time? I don't know. Do we even measure what happened the last time? Uh-oh. How many months of my life have I been pulling stories off a queue prioritized by a guy who doesn't even know what the customer wants? That doesn't sound very good. Think about all the people wasting their life doing this kabuki dance to pretend that we know what's going on. How much more satisfying would it be if every time we did an action, we knew for sure whether it worked or it didn't work? And if it didn't work, we had the opportunity to learn immediately and influence the next action. Nothing is safe. Your life is precious. And you owe it to yourself to have an impact. And you can't rely on someone else to tell you what's going to have an impact or not, because nobody really knows. So given that nobody knows, why not double check? And if there's one thing I would say to take away from the MVP, it's exactly that. Always double check. Thank you very much.
Gary, look at that timing. Fantastic. How good is that?